I never thought a simple drawing could change everything. When I found it hidden inside that old music box, my heart stopped beating for a moment. The house on that paper, it was mine, the home I'd lost 30 years ago. My name's Emma, and I've spent the last decade building my fortune from nothing. People call me a self-made millionaire, but they don't know the truth. I wasn't always rich, far from it. Growing up in a small shelter home after being abandoned as a baby, I never knew what having a real family felt like. That all changed 3 months ago when I purchased an antique store about to be demolished. Little did I know, hidden among the dusty treasures was a secret that would turn my world upside down and reconnect me with a past I never knew existed. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I first stepped into that old antique shop. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, was desperate to sell before developers tore the building down. His eyes lit up when I offered to buy the entire inventory. "You're saving 60 years of memories," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't tell him I was the developer who'd purchased the land. Something about his gentle demeanor made me want to help him, even though business was business. The shop was filled with forgotten treasures, old record players, vintage clothing, and countless trinkets that seemed to whisper stories from the past. I've always been drawn to old things, maybe because I never had anything of my own growing up. The children's shelter where I spent my first 18 years taught me to appreciate what little I had. We shared everything: clothes, toys, even toothbrushes sometimes when supplies ran low. The nuns did their best, but there were too many orphaned children and not enough resources. I remember watching families come to adopt the younger kids, their faces filled with hope and love. No one ever chose me. By the time I was 12, I stopped standing in line when potential parents visited. Some wounds cut too deep. After purchasing the shop, I hired a team to catalog everything before selling it off. My assistant, Jared, thought I was crazy. "Emma, you don't have time for this project," he argued while scrolling through my packed schedule. "The Henderson deal closes next week, and you haven't even looked at the paperwork." He wasn't wrong. My real estate development company kept me busy every waking hour. But something about this shop felt important, like I was supposed to find it. I couldn't explain the feeling, not even to myself. So I did what I always do when my instincts speak. I listened. The cataloging process took weeks. Every item needed to be photographed, documented, and appraised. I visited whenever I could, usually late at night after meetings had ended. The shop felt different in the darkness, more alive somehow. I'd walk through the narrow aisles, running my fingers over dusty shelves, wondering about the people who'd once owned these things. Had they been loved? Did they have families who missed them? Questions I'd asked about myself for years. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in an antique mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. Success had transformed me outwardly, but inside I was still that orphan girl. It was during one of these late-night visits that I found the music box. Small and unassuming, it sat on a high shelf behind larger items, almost like it was hiding. The wood was dark with age, intricate carvings decorating its sides. When I opened it, a soft melody played, a lullaby I somehow recognized, though I couldn't remember ever hearing it before. The sound brought tears to my eyes, though I couldn't explain why. Something about that gentle tune felt like home, a concept I'd never really understood. What happened next would change everything. As the melody played, I noticed something tucked into the lid, a folded piece of yellowed paper that had been hidden for what looked like decades. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing, the colors faded with time, but still visible. A house stood on a hill, surrounded by tall trees. A swing hung from one of the branches, and flowers dotted the lawn. But what made my blood run cold was the address written in childish scrawl at the bottom. 1452 Willow Lane. The same address listed on my birth certificate, the only clue to my past that the nuns had given me when I aged out of the system. I tried finding the house years ago, but records showed it had burned down shortly after I was born. No surviving family members could be located. I'd eventually stopped searching, burying myself in work instead. "It can't be," I whispered to the empty shop. The coincidence was too great. This drawing showed my family home, the place I'd never had the chance to know. But how had it ended up in this music box? And why did the lullaby feel so familiar? I sat on the dusty floor, studying every detail of the drawing. The more I looked, the more certain I became. This was drawn by someone who knew that house intimately. There was even a small detail, a weather vane shaped like a horse on top of the roof, that matched the only photograph I had of the house, a grainy image I'd found in old county records. This wasn't random. This was a connection to my past. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I researched everything I could about the antique shop and its previous owners. Mr. Peterson had run it for nearly 40 years, but before him, the shop belonged to a woman named Clara Jenkins. It took some digging and a few calls to people who owed me favors, but by morning, I had Clara's current address, a retirement home just outside the city. I canceled all my meetings despite Jared's protests and drove there immediately. My heart pounded the entire way. Was I finally going to find answers to questions I'd long since stopped asking? Or was this just another dead end in a lifetime of disappointments? The retirement home was cheerful enough, with bright walls and friendly staff. Clara Jenkins was 93 years old and, according to her nurse, still sharp as a tack. When I entered her room, I found a tiny woman with snow-white hair and alert blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Well," she said, studying my face with remarkable intensity, "I wondered if you'd ever find me." Her words sent chills down my spine. She spoke as if she'd been waiting for me, specifically me, all this time. I pulled out the music box and, drawing with shaking hands, placing them on the table between us. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for the box with trembling fingers. "You found it," she whispered, her voice suddenly young with emotion. "After all these years, you found Elizabeth's music box." I didn't know who Elizabeth was, but hearing the name made something stir inside me. Clara opened the box, and, as the lullaby played, she began to sing along softly. The words came to me then, rising from some buried place in my memory. I found myself joining her, our voices blending together in a song I somehow knew. When we finished, tears were streaming down both our faces. "You remember," she said, reaching for my hand. "Somewhere deep inside, you remember." And then she told me a story that would change everything I thought I knew about myself. Elizabeth was my mother. She'd been Clara's best friend since childhood, inseparable until the fire that claimed her life and that of my father. She wasn't supposed to die that night, Clara explained, her voice heavy with old grief. "She'd place you with me for safekeeping while she and your father went to confront him." When I asked who him was, Clara's expression darkened. "Your father's business partner, Victor Slate. He'd been embezzling money for years, and your parents finally had proof." The name hit me like a physical blow. Victor Slate was one of the wealthiest men in the city, a philanthropist whose name graced hospital wings and university buildings. He was also someone I'd done business with on several occasions. "The fire wasn't an accident," Clara continued, confirming what I'd always suspected but could never prove. "But Victor made sure it looked that way. Your parents were supposed to come back for you the next day, but—" She trailed off, unable to finish. I filled in the blanks. "They never returned because they couldn't." "But why didn't you keep me?" I asked, the question that had burned inside me my entire life. Why had I grown up in a shelter, unloved and unwanted, if someone had known who I was? Clara's face crumpled with regret. "Victor's men came looking. They knew about you, knew your parents had a child. I panicked. I thought they'd kill you too. So I hid you at the children's shelter temporarily, planning to come back once it was safe." Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. "But Victor watched me for years. By the time I felt safe enough to come for you, you'd been moved to another facility. I lost track of you. I should have been angry. I had every right to be furious that this woman's fear had sentenced me to a childhood of loneliness. But looking at Clara's face, seeing the decades of regret etched into every line, I couldn't summon rage. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I knew I hadn't been abandoned by choice. I had been loved. My parents had died, trying to expose a criminal. Clara had given me up to protect me. It didn't erase years of pain, but it changed the story I'd told myself about who I was and where I came from. The music box was your mother's, Clara explained. She loved it dearly. The lullaby, the one we just sang, she played it for you every night. She drew that picture of your house to put inside, so you'd always remember home. Clara reached for my hand again, her paper-thin skin cool against mine. When I lost track of you, I put the music box in my shop, hoping that somehow, someday, you might find it. I've kept the shop all these years for that reason, even after I became too old to run it myself. I hire managers, but never sold it until Mr. Peterson. When I finally had to sell, I made him promise never to remove anything until the right person came. She smiled weakly. He must have kept his word. I sat back, overwhelmed by the story and its implications. Victor Slate, respected businessman and community leader, was responsible for my parents' deaths. The same man who'd shaken my hand at charity galas, who'd partnered with my company on development projects. All these years, I've been doing business with the man who'd made me an orphan. Do you have proof? I asked Clara, my mind already racing ahead. She nodded slowly and pointed to a worn leather photo album on her bedside table. Everything your parents gathered is in there. Financial records, threatening letters Victor sent them, photos of meetings where he discussed illegal activities. Your father was meticulous. He kept everything. I paged through the album with increasing disbelief. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Victor Slate had systematically stolen millions from his own company, using the money to build his empire while framing others for his crimes. My parents had been about to expose him when they died. Why didn't you take this to the police? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Clara laughed bitterly. Victor owned the police chief back then. He owned half the city. Who would believe an ordinary woman over him? I tried once early on. The detective I spoke to disappeared a week later. His family moved away overnight. She shook her head. I realized then that I couldn't fight him directly. So I waited, kept the evidence safe, and hoped that someday someone would come who could use it. She looked at me intently. Someone like you, Emma. Someone with the resources and connections to finally bring him down. Your mother would be so proud of what you've built. She always said you'd do important things. The knowledge that my mother had believed in me before she even knew me was like a balm to old wounds. For hours, Clara shared stories about my parents, how they'd met in college, their dreams for the future, the way my father would carry me on his shoulders while my mother laughed at his silly jokes. She had photos, too, faded snapshots of the people I came from. I had my mother's eyes and my father's smile, Clara said. Looking at their faces was like finding pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known was incomplete. This was my heritage, my history, not the blank slate I'd carried all my life, but a rich tapestry of love and courage and ultimately sacrifice. As evening approached, nurses came to tell me visiting hours were ending. I didn't want to leave. After decades of emptiness, I'd finally found someone who knew me, who could tell me who I was meant to be. Before I left, Clara pressed the music box and album into my hands. Finish what they started, she said, her voice suddenly strong with purpose. Victor is still out there, still hurting people. Your parents died trying to stop him. You have the power to succeed where they couldn't. I promised her I would try, though I had no idea how to bring down one of the most powerful men in the city. As I turned to go, Clara called me back one last time. There's something else you should know, she said, her expression unreadable. You weren't their only child. Her words stopped me in my tracks. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Clara's eyes filled with new tears. Your mother was pregnant when she died. For months along. They had just found out it was a boy. Your little brother. Another loss I hadn't known to grieve. Another life cut short by Victor Slate's greed. I left the retirement home with my head spinning, carrying the weight of new knowledge and old sorrows. The drive back to my penthouse passed in a blur. Once home, I spread everything on my dining table. The music box, the album of evidence, the childhood drawing of the house I'd never really known. I should have felt overwhelmed, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I had purpose beyond making money, beyond proving my worth. The next morning, I called my most trusted lawyer, Sarah Chun. If anyone could help me navigate this situation legally, It was her. I told her once that she was the most ruthlessly ethical person I knew, which made her both a frustrating opponent and an invaluable ally. When she arrived, I explained everything, showing her the evidence Clara had preserved. Sarah's expression grew increasingly grim as she flipped through the financial records and threatening letters. "This is significant," she said finally, looking up at me with serious eyes. "But much of it would be inadmissible in court after so many years. Statutes of limitations have expired on the financial crimes." I felt my heart sink. "But not on murder," she added, tapping a photograph of my parents. "There's no statute of limitations on murder." Hope flickered to life again. "So we can get him?" I asked. Sarah's expression was cautious. "It won't be easy. Victor Slate has powerful friends, extensive resources. He's had decades to cover his tracks. And these records alone aren't enough to prove he arranged your parents' deaths." She was right, of course. The evidence showed motive, but not direct involvement. We needed more. What if we approached this differently? I suggested an idea forming. What if, instead of attacking him directly for my parents' murder, we used their evidence as a starting point to investigate his current activities? If he was corrupt then, he's probably corrupt now. Fresh crimes, fresh evidence. Sarah considered this, then slowly nodded. That could work. White-collar criminals rarely stop at one scheme. If we could catch him in current illegal activities, we might be able to use that as leverage to reopen your parents' case. She began making notes, her legal mind already mapping strategy. "We'll need help," she warned. "Investigators, forensic accountants, maybe even someone inside his organization." I thought of my business connections, the network I'd built over years of climbing to the top. "I can get us help," I assured her. "Money opens doors, and I have plenty of that." What I didn't say was that I was prepared to spend every cent of my fortune if necessary. Some things mattered more than wealth. Over the next few weeks, we assembled a small but skilled team. A former FBI financial crimes specialist, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness, a cybersecurity expert who could track digital paper trails, all working under Sarah's direction while I continued my normal business activities, careful not to draw attention. We discovered that Victor, now in his 70s, had diversified his criminal enterprises. He was laundering money through real estate developments, including some of my own projects. I learned to my horror, engaging in insider trading and bribing city officials to look the other way on safety violations. The more we uncovered, the larger the web of corruption grew. And at the center of it all sat Victor Slate, untouchable and arrogant in his perceived immunity. I maintained my public persona, attending the same events, making the same business deals. Twice I encountered Victor at charity galas, and it took every ounce of self-control to shake his hand and smile, as if I didn't know he was responsible for destroying my family. He seemed to sense something different about me, his eyes lingering on my face with vague puzzlement. "Have we met somewhere before?" he asked during our second encounter, studying me with uncomfortable intensity. My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "Only at events like these," I replied smoothly. "I'm in real estate development." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, but I felt his gaze following me for the rest of the evening. Had he noticed my resemblance to my mother? Did some part of him recognize the child of the people he'd murdered? The investigation progressed slowly but steadily. Each piece of evidence we gathered was meticulously documented and secured. Sarah insisted we build an airtight case before making any moves. "We'll only get one shot at this," she reminded me often. "If we miss, he'll destroy everything and everyone involved." I knew she was right, but patience had never been my strong suit, especially now when I visited Clara weekly and watched her health declining. She wanted to see justice before she died. I wanted to give her that peace. One afternoon, as I was leaving her room, she caught my hand. "Remember the house," she said cryptically. "Your father's study. There was a safe behind the painting of the mountains. Elizabeth told me about it once. The house on Willow Lane had burned to the ground 30 years ago. Whatever had been in that safe was surely destroyed." But Clara's words nagged at me. I decided to visit the property, now an empty lot in a neighborhood that had seen better days. City records showed no attempts to rebuild after the fire, though the land had changed hands several times. Currently, it was owned by a holding company called WL Properties. Another shell corporation in Victor's network, perhaps? I stood on the overgrown lot, trying to imagine the house that once stood there. According to the drawing, it had been beautiful, a two-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and dormers in the roof. The kind of home where a family would be happy. On impulse, I called the contractor who handled many of my development projects. Mike, I need ground-penetrating radar at a site, specifically looking for a safe or vault, possibly in what would have been the northwest corner of a house. He didn't ask questions. He was used to my sometimes unusual requests. 2 days later, his team scanned the empty lot. To everyone's surprise, they found something. Not a safe, but what appeared to be a small room or cellar approximately 10 feet below ground level. The fire had destroyed the house, but not whatever lay beneath it. I immediately arranged for excavation, careful to keep the project quiet by classifying it as an environmental study. What we uncovered was astonishing: a concrete bunker, roughly 8 by 10 feet, accessible via what had once been a trapdoor in the floor of my father's study. The entrance was now buried under debris and dirt, but the bunker itself had survived intact, sealed against time and elements. When we finally broke through, I was the first to enter, flashlight in hand, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The beam of light revealed a small table, a filing cabinet, and on the far wall, a safe, just as Clara had described, though now sitting on the floor rather than mounted on a wall. The combination lock stared at me like a challenge. What will my father have used? Birthdays? Anniversary dates? I had only recently learned these significant numbers from Clara. I tried several combinations without success: my parents' birth dates, their anniversary, my own birthday. Nothing worked. Frustration mounting, I sat on the dusty floor and shone my light around the bunker, looking for clues. That's when I noticed small markings scratched into the concrete wall beside the safe. At first, I thought they were random, perhaps damage from the fire or collapse. But as I looked closer, I realized they formed numbers: 7-22-11-18. Not a date, not an address. What could it mean? Then it hit me, my name. The numbers corresponded to the position of letters in the alphabet. May. My father had used my name as his code. With trembling fingers, I dialed the combination, and the safe clicked open. Inside were documents, more financial records, but also something unexpected: a video cassette labeled insurance. I gathered everything into my briefcase, hardly daring to believe what we'd found. Analysis of the financial records revealed that Victor hadn't just been embezzling from their company. He'd been running a massive Ponzi scheme that had ruined dozens of families. My parents had documented it all, but it was the videotape that proved most valuable. After finding someone who could convert the outdated format to digital, I watched in stunned silence as my father appeared on screen, looking directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this," he said, "then Elizabeth and I are probably dead. Victor Slate has threatened our lives, and we're meeting him tonight to confront him." He detailed the evidence they'd gathered, then added words that chilled me: "We're wearing recording devices. Whatever happens tonight, there will be a record." Where was that recording now? Had it been destroyed in the fire, or was it still out there somewhere? I shared everything with Sarah and our team, renewed hope driving us forward. The bunker's contents gave us solid evidence of Victor's historical crimes and tied directly to my parents' deaths. We now had my father's testimony that they feared for their lives specifically because of Victor. But Sarah remained cautious. "It's still not enough for a murder conviction after 30 years, she said. "We need that recording or a confession." We debated our next steps carefully. Should we take what we had to the authorities now, or continue building our case? The decision was made for us when one of our team members noticed unusual activity on her computer. Someone was attempting to access our files. We were being watched. We immediately implemented counter-surveillance measures, moving our operation to a secure location and changing all communication protocols. But the damage was done. Victor knew something was happening. I realized this with certainty when I received an invitation to a private dinner at his mansion, an honor he extended to very few. The note attached was gracious, but left no room for refusal. I insist on getting to know the dynamic woman who's making such waves in our city's development. Your recent interest in certain properties has caught my attention. He knew, perhaps not everything, but enough to be suspicious. Enough to want me close where he could assess the threat. Sarah advised against going. It's too dangerous, she argued. He's killed before to protect his secrets. But I saw an opportunity. This might be our only chance to get what we need, I countered. If I'm inside his house, wearing a wire like my parents were. Sarah's expression turned horrified. Absolutely not. That's exactly how your parents ended up dead. She was right, of course, but I couldn't see another way forward. Victor was too careful, too protected. We needed something definitive to bring him down, and this invitation might be the only opening we'd get. After hours of debate, we reached a compromise. I would accept the invitation, but with extensive precautions. Our team would monitor from nearby with a tactical response plan if anything went wrong. I would wear the most sophisticated recording equipment available, undetectable by standard security measures. And most importantly, I would not confront Victor directly. My goal was reconnaissance only, to find information, not force a confrontation. The night of the dinner arrived with thunderstorms that seemed fitting for the occasion. I dressed carefully in an elegant black dress that concealed the recording equipment while projecting successful businesswoman rather than avenging daughter. Victor's mansion was exactly what you'd expect from a man of his wealth and ego. Sprawling grounds, classical architecture, priceless art on every wall. Security was visible but discreet. I was scanned for weapons upon arrival, but the cutting-edge equipment I wore remained undetected. Victor himself greeted me in the grand foyer, every inch the gracious host. Up close, he was older than he appeared in photographs, late 70s, with age spots on his hands and neck that expensive suits and good lighting couldn't hide on television or at public events. Ms. Foster, he said, taking my hand, I'm delighted you could join me this evening. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained calculating and cold. The pleasure is mine, I replied, matching his fake warmth with my own. Your home is spectacular. He led me through to a formal dining room where a table was set for two. No witnesses, I noted with unease. But our team was monitoring, ready to intervene if necessary. We made polite conversation through the first course, business, city politics, mutual acquaintances. He was probing, watching my reactions carefully. I maintained my cover, revealing nothing of importance. It wasn't until dessert was served that he finally showed his hand. You've been quite busy lately, he remarked casually. Not just with your development projects. My heart skipped, but I kept my expression neutral. Business diversification is important, I replied smoothly. He chuckled, the sound entirely without humor. Indeed, though I wonder about your interest in certain historical matters, particularly regarding Willow Lane. There was the confirmation that he knew at least part of what I was doing. I decided to take a calculated risk. I find local history fascinating, I said, especially when it intersects with potential development opportunities. Victor studied me for a long moment before rising from his chair. Come with me, he said. There's something I'd like to show you. Every instinct warned against following him deeper into the house, away from escape routes. But this was what I'd come for, a chance to gather evidence. He led me to his study, a masculine space dominated by dark wood and leather. The walls were lined with books and accomplishments, framed newspaper articles, photographs with politicians and celebrities, awards for philanthropy. The shrine of a man obsessed with his own legacy. Impressive collection, I commented, scanning the room for anything useful. Victor moved to a cabinet and removed a decanter of amber liquid. Scotch, he offered. I declined politely, needing to keep my wits sharp. He poured himself a generous glass and took a long sip before fixing me with a penetrating stare. Who are you really, Ms. Foster? He asked bluntly. What do you want from me? I maintained my composure with effort. I'm exactly who I appear to be, I replied. A businesswoman interested in profitable opportunities. He laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. No, he said, shaking his head. There's more. I've had you investigated, you see. orphaned as an infant, raised in shelters, no family connections whatsoever. Yet you've built an empire from nothing. He moved closer, studying my face with uncomfortable intensity. And you bear a striking resemblance to someone I once knew. My pulse quickened. This was dangerous territory. He was too close to the truth. Many people find me familiar, I deflected. I have that kind of face. Victor wasn't deterred. What's your real interest in Willow Lane? He pressed. What were you looking for when you excavated that lot? I knew I had to be careful. One wrong word could alert him to how much I knew. As I said, I'm interested in development opportunities. The lot has potential. Victor circled me slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. Development opportunities don't usually involve excavating specific sections of a property before purchase, he observed. Nor do they typically involve research into fires that occurred 30 years ago. He stopped directly in front of me, his eyes cold. You're looking into the Wallace fire. Why? Wallace, my parents' surname. At least he didn't seem to suspect I was their daughter. Perhaps he thought I was just an investigator or journalist. I decided to play into that assumption. Historical due diligence is part of my process, I said. Tragic events on a property can affect value. Victor studied me for another long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. The Wallace matter was unfortunate, he said, his tone suddenly conversational as he moved to sit behind his desk. Terrible tragedy. David Wallace was a brilliant businessman. His wife Elizabeth was quite beautiful. The casual way he spoke of my parents made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. You knew them? I asked, injecting just the right amount of casual interest into my voice. Victor nodded, swirling his scotch. We were partners. David and I built Slate Wallace Investments together. His death was a significant setback for the company. The audacity of his lies stunned me. A setback. That's how he characterized the murders he'd orchestrated. What happened to them? I asked, pushing slightly. Victor's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing back into practiced neutrality. A house fire. Faulty wiring, according to the investigation. Very common in those older homes. He sighed, the perfect picture of an old man remembering lost friends. Such a waste. And their poor child, left orphaned. We searched for family to take the baby in, but there were none to be found. More lies. He hadn't searched for family. He'd made sure I disappeared into the system. I wanted to scream the truth at him, to see recognition and fear dawn in his eyes. But that would accomplish nothing except perhaps getting me killed. I needed to remain calm, to gather evidence. The company recovered well from the setback, I observed, gesturing to the wealth evident in every corner of the room. Victor smiled thinly. Yes, we weather that storm. Business requires resilience, Miss Foster. I'm sure you understand that better than most, given your background. His meaning was clear. He was reminding me that he knew about my orphan past, perhaps as a subtle threat. I admire resilience, I replied. And justice. I couldn't help adding that last word, watching carefully for his reaction. His smile faltered slightly, a brief flash of something. Wariness? Concern? Crossing his features before disappearing. Justice is a complex concept, he said carefully, especially when viewed through the lens of time. Our conversation continued like this, a dangerous dance of veiled statements and careful probes. Victor was clearly suspicious of my interest, but seemed uncertain of exactly what I knew or why I cared. Eventually, he escorted me back to the foyer. Our evening apparently concluded. As we reached the front door, he paused. One last thing, Miss Foster, he said, his tone suddenly hard. A word of advice from someone who's navigated business waters far longer than you have. Sometimes the past is better left buried. Digging too deeply can unearth unpleasant things. Things that might be hazardous to one's health and future. The threat couldn't have been clearer. I met his gaze steadily. Thank you for the advice, I said. I've always believed in learning from history, but I'll certainly keep your words in mind. The drive home was tense. I could feel Victor's warning hanging over me like a physical presence. Once safely away from his property, I contacted Sarah. He knows I'm investigating, but he doesn't seem to know who I really am, I told her. He threatened me, though, not directly enough to use as evidence, but unmistakably. Sarah sounded worried. This changes things. If he feels threatened, he might move against you. We need to accelerate our timeline." I agreed. The recording equipment had captured our entire conversation. While Victor hadn't confessed to anything explicitly, his comments about my parents and veiled threats provided context that strengthened our case. Combined with the evidence from the bunker and Clara's testimony, we were getting closer to something that might convince authorities to act. The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, Clara's nurse was on the line. "Miss Foster, you need to come quickly. Ms. Jenkins had a stroke during the night. She's asking for you." I drove to the retirement home at dangerous speeds, praying I wouldn't be too late. Clara was pale and diminished in her hospital bed, medical equipment beeping softly around her. But her eyes were clear when they found mine. "You saw him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can tell." I nodded, taking her fragile hand in mine. "He suspects something, but he doesn't know who I am." Clara's fingers tightened slightly around mine. "Be careful," she warned. "Victor is most dangerous when cornered." "We're close to having enough evidence," I assured her. "The bunker your brother, that was intact. My father left a video statement and financial records. If we could just find the recording device they were wearing that night." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "The recording," she repeated. "I never knew what happened to it." "But—" She paused, struggling to find strength. "There was a detective. Early on, he believed me when no one else would. Looked into the case unofficially, then disappeared suddenly. Jameson. Detective Michael Jameson. A new lead after all these years. I promised Clara I would find him if he was still alive." She smiled weakly, her eyes drifting closed. "You look so much like her," she murmured. "Elizabeth will be proud." I stayed until she fell asleep, then left with renewed determination. Finding Michael Jameson proved surprisingly straightforward. He hadn't disappeared in the sinister way Clara had feared. He'd simply relocated to Arizona after leaving the police force. Now in his 60s, he built a modest private investigation business in Phoenix. I flew out the next day, not trusting this conversation to phone or email. When I walked into his small office and introduced myself, recognition dawned in his weathered face immediately. "You're Elizabeth Wallace's daughter," he said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "I've wondered about you for years. Whether you survived, whether you were safe." He'd known about me, had perhaps been one of the few people besides Clara who cared what had happened to the orphaned infant. Over coffee in his modest office, Michael Jameson shared what he knew. "Your parents were wearing recording devices that night," he confirmed, validating what my father had said in the video. "Custom-made, cutting-edge for the time. Your father approached me weeks before, worried about threats from Victor. I helped him set it up unofficially." His eyes clouded with old regrets. "When they died, I tried to find the recordings, but the fire had destroyed most evidence. Victor's people were all over the scene before I could conduct a proper search." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "But I did find something at the scene that night. Something small that had been overlooked." From a locked drawer in his desk, Jameson retrieved a small metal box. "I've kept this for 30 years, hoping someday it might matter again." Inside was a charred but intact memory chip, smaller than a postage stamp. "This is from your mother's recording device," he explained. "I found it in what remained of their car, parked outside the house. The fire hadn't reached it completely." My hands trembled as I held this tiny piece of my parents' final moments. "Can the data still be recovered?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. Jameson nodded. "It should be possible with today's technology. I never had the resources to try, and going through official channels would have alerted Victor." I returned to the city with the memory chip secured in a protective case. Our team's tech expert worked for 3 days straight to recover the data. When she finally succeeded, we gathered to listen. The recording was scratchy with occasional gaps, but clear enough. My parents' voices came through first, discussing strategy as they drove to meet Victor. Then Victor's voice, initially cordial, but quickly turning menacing. "You should have left it alone, David," he said at one point. "Some things aren't meant to be discovered." My father responded steadily. "People trusted us with their money, Victor. We can't let this continue." The confrontation escalated, with Victor eventually admitting to the embezzlement, but refusing to make amends. Then came the words we needed. If you go public with this, neither of you will live to see the consequences, Victor threatened. My mother's voice, strong and defiant. It's already done, Victor. The evidence has been secured. Even if something happens to us, the truth will come out. Sounds of struggle followed, then my father shouting for my mother to run. The recording ended with the unmistakable sound of gunshots. Not a fire, then. They had been shot first. The fire set afterward to cover the evidence. I sat in stunned silence as the recording ended, tears streaming down my face. I had just heard my parents' final moments, their courage in the face of death. They had died standing up for what was right, protecting others from Victor's crimes. Sarah was the first to speak. "This is it," she said, her voice thick with emotion though she'd never known my parents. "This is what we needed. Combined with the financial evidence and your father's video statement, we have enough to go to the authorities." I agreed, but added one condition. I want to confront him first. I want him to know who I am before the police take him away. Sarah protested vehemently, citing all the obvious dangers. "He's already killed to protect his secrets," she reminded me. "And now he suspects you're investigating him." But my mind was made. This wasn't just about justice in the abstract. It was personal. Victor had stolen my family, my heritage, my chance at a normal life. Before he faced legal consequences, I wanted him to face me. We compromised again. I would confront Victor, but with extensive precautions. The recording equipment where would transmit directly to authorities waiting nearby. Sarah had contacted trusted officials at the FBI's white-collar crime division, carefully avoiding local law enforcement that might still be influenced by Victor. The plan was set for the following evening. I would request a meeting with Victor at his office, ostensibly to discuss a business partnership. Once inside, with recording equipment active and agents standing by, I would reveal who I was and what we knew. It was risky, but calculated. Victor was old now, less physically threatening than he had been 30 years ago. And this time, I wouldn't be alone and unprotected as my parents had been. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking of Clara, now recovering slowly in the hospital, of Michael Jameson, who had kept faith with my parents' memory for 3 decades, of the parents I'd never really known, but whose courage had been revealed to me through their final actions. And most of all, of the little girl I'd been, alone, unwanted, unaware of the truth behind her abandonment. I'd spent my life building walls around myself, creating success as a shield against vulnerability. But now those walls were crumbling. Finding my past hadn't just given me answers. It had given me something I never truly had before, an identity rooted in belonging. Whatever happened tomorrow, I was no longer just Emma Foster, self-made millionaire. I was Emma Wallace, daughter of David and Elizabeth. Their blood ran in my veins. Their courage was my inheritance. The next morning, I called Victor's office and requested a meeting. His secretary seemed surprised, but scheduled me for 7 p.m., after normal business hours when the building would be largely empty. Exactly as we'd anticipated. I spent the day finalizing details with Sarah and the FBI team. The recording equipment was tested repeatedly. Agents would be positioned throughout the building, disguised as cleaning staff. Others would wait in vehicles outside, ready to move in at the first sign of trouble. Sarah would monitor everything from a command center nearby. "If he makes any threatening move," she instructed, "say the phrase, 'I should reconsider my position.' That's the signal for immediate intervention." I nodded, memorizing the phrase, though I hoped not to need it. At 6:45 p.m., I entered the towering glass headquarters of Slate Enterprises. The security guard waved me through, my name evidently on an approved list. The elevator ride to the top floor gave me time to steady my nerves. I touched the small music box in my purse. I'd brought it as tangible proof of my identity. The elevator doors opened directly into a reception area where Victor's secretary greeted me. "Mr. Slate is expecting you," she said, leading me to an imposing set of double doors at the end of the hall. She knocked once, then opened them to announce me. "Miss Foster to see you, sir." And then I was alone with him, the man who had destroyed my family. Victor's office was a testament to power, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city he'd helped build, walls adorned with awards and photographs of him with the powerful and famous. He rose from behind a massive desk, gesturing to a chair across from him. "Miss Foster," he greeted me, his tone cautious but civil. This meeting request was unexpected after our dinner the other night. I'm curious what business proposition was so urgent it couldn't wait until morning. I took the offered seat, studying him carefully. Did he look nervous? Suspicious? It was hard to tell. Victor Slate had spent decades perfecting his mask. "What I have to discuss isn't exactly business," I replied. "At least, not in the conventional sense." Victor's expression tightened slightly. "Oh, then what brings you here?" I reached into my purse and removed the music box, placing it carefully on his desk. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his face betraying nothing. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. I opened the box, allowing the familiar lullaby to fill the silence between us. His face paled as the melody played. "You recognize it, don't you?" I said quietly. "It belonged to Elizabeth Wallace." Victor's eyes snapped to my face, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. "Who are you?" he demanded, though I think he already knew the answer. The resemblance to my mother that he'd noted at dinner now made sudden, terrible sense to him. "My name is Emma Wallace," I said, stating my true name for the first time in my adult life. "I'm the daughter of David and Elizabeth Wallace, the baby you thought had disappeared into the system after you murdered my parents." Victor's composure cracked then, just for an instant, before he regained control. "That's a serious accusation," he said, his voice steady but his hands gripping the edge of his desk. "And entirely without foundation. The Wallaces died in a tragic accident. If you are indeed their daughter, I'm sorry for your loss, but I had nothing to do with it." I smiled without humor. "We both know that's not true," I replied. "Just as we both know about the embezzlement, the Ponzi scheme, the countless lives you ruined to build your empire." Victor's demeanor changed, the mask of civility slipping away to reveal the predator beneath. "You can't prove any of that," he said, his voice harder now. "Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you think you have, it won't be enough. Do you have any idea who I am in this city? Who would believe you over me?" I leaned forward slightly. "I have my father's records from the bunker beneath our house, the one that survived the fire you set. I have witness testimony from Clara Jenkins, who protected me when you sent men looking for the Wallace's baby. I have Detective Jameson, who investigated unofficially and preserved evidence. And most importantly," I continued, watching his face closely, "I have the recording my parents made the night you killed them." The color drained from Victor's face. "That's impossible," he whispered. "The devices were destroyed in the fire. I made sure of it." His admission hung in the air between us, unintended but damning. I nodded slowly. "Not completely destroyed. Technology has come a long way in 30 years. Enough data was recovered for us to hear you threatening my parents, to hear the gunshots before the fire was set." Victor stood abruptly, moving around the desk toward me. I tensed, ready to use Sarah's code phrase if necessary. But he didn't attack. Instead, he moved to the window, staring out at the city he'd built on corruption and murder. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Money? Is that it? Name your price." The offer was so predictable, so pathetically in character, that I actually laughed. "I'm worth hundreds of millions, Victor. I don't need your money." I stood as well, facing him directly. "What I want is justice. For my parents. For all the people you've hurt. The FBI has everything, the historical evidence, proof of your current crimes, and they're listening to this entire conversation right now." I gestured to my concealed recording equipment. "Agents are in this building, waiting for my signal. You're finished." For a moment, Victor seemed to age before my eyes, the reality of his situation sinking in. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a cold, calculated expression that sent a chill down my spine. "You're more like your father than I realized," he said. He underestimated me, too. Before I could react, he pressed a button beneath the edge of his desk. Instantly, metal shutters began descending over the windows and doors. An alarm blared briefly, then cut off. Executive Security Protocol, Victor explained calmly. Designed for terrorist threats. The room is now sealed and signal-proof. No transmissions in or out. Your FBI friends can't hear us anymore, and they can't get in without specialized equipment that will take hours to deploy. My heart raced as I realized the danger. We hadn't anticipated this level of security. I was trapped with him, cut off from help. I should reconsider my position, I said clearly, hoping against hope that the signal was getting through somehow. Victor laughed. Nice try. But as I said, no signals are penetrating these walls. He moved to a cabinet and removed something that made my blood run cold. A handgun, which he placed on his desk. Now, let's discuss this rationally. He continued, his confidence returning. You've clearly gone to extraordinary lengths to build this case against me. I can respect that kind of determination. It reminds me of your mother. The comparison made my skin crawl. But you've overlooked something crucial. I've had 30 years to prepare for this moment. 30 years to establish fail-safes, to embed loyal people in every level of law enforcement to secure my legacy. He gestured expansively. Even if you somehow manage to take me down, systems are in place. People you care about will suffer. I maintain my composure with effort, mind racing to find a way out of this situation. You're bluffing, I said, with more confidence than I felt. Your influence isn't what it once was. The world has changed, Victor. Information moves too quickly now for old-school intimidation to work. I glanced meaningfully at the gun on his desk. And if you use that, you'll only add to the charges when they eventually break in here. Because they will break in. You can't hide forever. Victor's expression darkened. I don't need forever, he replied. Just long enough to deal with you and the evidence you claim to have. Dead witnesses tell no tales. And accidents happen to people who pry into dangerous matters. The threat was clear, but I refused to show fear. Instead, I reached into my purse again, this time removing a small device Sarah had insisted I carry, a panic button that would alert the team if my primary recording equipment failed. I pressed it surreptitiously, hoping it might penetrate the room's shielding. Let me tell you what's really going to happen, I said, keeping his attention on my face. Right now, when my signal cut off unexpectedly, the FBI team went into emergency protocols. They're already working to breach this room. Meanwhile, separate teams are executing search warrants on all your properties simultaneously. The evidence isn't just in one place, Victor. It's been distributed, backed up, secured against exactly this type of contingency. I took a step toward him, bolstered by quiet fury. You stole my family from me. You sent me into a system where I was nobody, where I had to fight for every scrap of dignity and opportunity. I spent my entire life building walls around myself because I believed I had been abandoned, that I wasn't worth loving. Each word was a weapon now, cutting through his arrogance. But I survived. I thrived. I built something from nothing, without the advantages you had, without stepping on others to elevate myself. And now I'm going to take back what you stole from me. My name, my history, my parents' legacy of integrity. You're going to spend what remains of your miserable life in prison, watching as everything you built crumbles. Victor's face contorted with rage. You self-righteous little. He reached for the gun, but before he could grab it, a tremendous crash shook the room. One of the sealed doors buckled inward as something heavy impacted it from the outside. The FBI team was breaking through sooner than either of us had expected. Victor's eyes widened in genuine fear for the first time. He lunged for the gun, but I was faster, snatching it off the desk and backing away. I'd never held a gun before, but pointed it at him with steady hands. Don't move, I ordered as the pounding on the door intensified. Victor froze, calculating his options and apparently finding them limited. It's over, Victor, I said as the door gave way with a screech of protesting metal. FBI agents poured into the room, weapons drawn. Their commander addressed me. Ms. Wallace, are you all right? I nodded, carefully setting the gun down as agents secured Victor. He didn't resist as they handcuffed him, seeming almost resigned now that his options had run out. As they led him past me toward the door, he paused briefly. You really are David's daughter, he said, a strange mixture of respect and bitterness in his voice. He would be proud. Coming from him, it should have felt like an insult. Instead, I accepted it as the closest thing to a concession I would ever get. Yes, I replied simply. I am my father's daughter, and my mother's too. The aftermath unfolded like a surreal dream. Victor Slate, once untouchable, was charged with the murders of David and Elizabeth Wallace, along with decades of financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. With the recording of my parents' final moments, Victor's inadvertent confession in his office, and the mountain of financial documentation, prosecutors were confident of conviction on all counts. News of his arrest sent shockwaves through the city's elite circles. Some distanced themselves immediately, while others who had benefited from his crimes scrambled to make deals with authorities. The empire he'd built began to crumble, revealing rot at every level. Clara witnessed it all from her hospital bed, following the news coverage with tearful satisfaction. "Your parents can rest now," she told me during one of my daily visits. Her health had stabilized somewhat, though the doctors warned her recovery would be slow at her age. "And you," she added, patting my hand, "you can begin to truly live." She was right. For all my outward success, I'd been incomplete, building my life around an absence, around questions I couldn't answer. Now, with the truth revealed and justice in process, I felt a strange new lightness. The walls I constructed around my heart weren't necessary anymore. I had a history, a legacy, a name that meant something beyond what I'd built myself. In the weeks that followed, I made changes both practical and profound. Legally, I reclaimed my birth name, becoming Emma Wallace publicly. The business empire I'd built remained strong, but my priorities shifted. I established a foundation in my parents' names, dedicated to supporting children in the foster system, ensuring they received education, opportunities, and most importantly, a sense of identity and worth that I had lacked. The children's shelter where I'd spent my early years became the foundation's first major project, renovated and expanded with programs designed by experts in childhood trauma and development. No child there would feel unwanted or forgotten, not if I could help it. Clara became family to me, the closest thing to a grandmother I would ever know. When she was well enough to leave the hospital, I moved her into my home, where she delighted in sharing stories about my parents that filled in the empty spaces in my history. Through her memories, I came to know the people who had loved me first, my father's quiet intelligence, my mother's fierce determination, the dreams they had cherished for their daughter. "You have your mother's laugh," Clara told me one evening as we looked through old photographs she had preserved, "and your father's way of tilting your head when you're thinking deeply." Small inheritances, but precious beyond measure to someone who had grown up believing she had nothing to inherit. The music box sat on my bedside table now. Each night before sleep, I would open it, allowing the lullaby to fill the darkness, a tangible connection to the mother who had once sung it to me, the father who had built a hiding place to preserve truth for a future he wouldn't live to see. Sometimes I would hold the childhood drawing, tracing the crayon lines of the house on Willow Lane with my fingertips. That empty lot was mine now, purchased from a shell company that had held it all these years. I hadn't decided yet what to do with it. Perhaps rebuild the house from the drawing, perhaps create something new that honored what had been lost there. Whatever I chose, it would be a reclamation, a healing. Victor's trial began 6 months after his arrest. I attended every day, sitting in the front row where he couldn't avoid seeing me. Clara came when her health permitted, as did Michael Jameson, who had returned to testify about his role in preserving evidence. The prosecution presented their case methodically, unveiling 3 decades of corruption, intimidation, and finally murder. The recording of my parents' final moments was played in court, their voices echoing through the silent room. I watched Victor's face as he was forced to listen to his own threats, to the gunshots that had ended 2 lives and orphaned a child. For once, his mask slipped completely, revealing a glimpse of something that might have been regret, or perhaps merely fear of consequences too long delayed. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke directly to the jury, sharing not just the facts of my investigation, but the human cost of Victor's crimes. He didn't just take my parents' lives. I told them, my voice steady despite the emotion behind my words. He stole my history, my sense of belonging, my understanding of who I was meant to be. For 30 years, I believed I had been abandoned, that I wasn't worth keeping or loving. I built a life around that wound, never knowing the truth, that I had been fiercely loved, that my parents died protecting others from this man's greed. The jury's faces reflected back empathy, outrage, and determination for justice. When a verdict came 2 weeks later, guilty on all counts, it felt less like victory and more like exhale. A breath held for 30 years, finally released. Victor was sentenced to life without parole. At 77, it amounted to a death sentence. I visited him once in prison, not for closure or forgiveness, but to return something that had never belonged to him. This city was built by people like my parents, I told him across the table in the visiting room. People of integrity, who created value without destroying others. You've been taking credit for their work, for their vision, for too long. That ends now. I'd brought documentation of a new historical foundation I was funding, dedicated to researching and properly attributing the contributions of those Victor had silenced or marginalized throughout his career. Your name will fade, I promised him. Theirs will endure. He seemed smaller somehow in his prison uniform, diminished without the trappings of power and wealth. Why come tell me this? He asked, genuine puzzlement in his roomy eyes. You've won. I'll die in here. Isn't that enough? I consider the question carefully before answering. This isn't about vengeance, I said finally. It's about restoration. You took something precious from the world when you killed my parents. Not just their lives, but the good they would have done, the people they would have helped, the community they would have built. I'm making sure that legacy continues, despite what you did. I'm making sure they're remembered. He had no response to that, and I left without looking back. There was nothing more to say to the man who had shaped my life through absence. Life settled into new patterns after the trial. I found myself smiling more, laughing more freely, opening myself to friendships and possibilities I'd always held at arm's length before. The foundation work brought me into contact with children who reminded me painfully of myself, guarded, suspicious of kindness, afraid to hope for permanence. With them, I share not just resources but understanding. Your past doesn't determine your future, I would tell them. And you are never, ever truly alone. Some days, I believe those words more than others. Healing, I was learning, wasn't linear. It came in waves, in quiet moments of revelation, in gradual shifting of perspective. The abandoned child within me would always exist, but she no longer controlled the woman I had become. A year after Victor's conviction, I stood on the empty lot on Willow Lane, Clara beside me in her wheelchair, Michael Jameson on my other side. We'd gathered for a groundbreaking ceremony, though the media hadn't been invited. This moment was personal, not public. The architectural plans in my hand showed not a replica of my childhood home, but something new, a community center for foster children and families, with programs for education, therapy, mentorship, and reunification when possible. Behind the main building, a memorial garden would honor my parents and others like them who had stood against corruption, even at terrible cost. They would have loved this, Clara said, tears in her eyes as she studied the plans. It's exactly what they would have wanted. As we stood there, an unexpected visitor approached, Sarah Chun, the attorney who had helped build the case against Victor. We'd stayed in touch, our professional relationship evolving into friendship. Sorry I'm late, she called, hurrying toward us with something tucked under her arm. I wanted to bring this for the ceremony. She handed me a framed document, the deed to the property, officially registered in the name of the Wallace Family Foundation. It's official now, she said. This land is back where it belongs. The gesture touched me deeply. Sarah had understood from the beginning that this case was about more than justice in the abstract. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, about establishing continuity between past and present. The four of us performed a simple ceremony, turning the first shovelful of earth together. As we did, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing. The frightened child I had been, the driven woman I had become, the person I was still growing into, all were present in that moment, acknowledged and embraced. Later, as workers began the actual excavation for foundations, I walked the perimeter of the property alone, absorbing the reality of what was happening here. New beginnings rising from tragic endings. Hope built on the ruins of despair. It wasn't just a construction project. It was a statement about the nature of healing, about the possibility of transformation without erasure of the past. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my home. Clara, Michael, Sarah, and a few others who have been instrumental in bringing Victor to justice. As we shared a meal, we also shared stories, not just about the investigation and trial, but about our lives, our histories, our hopes for the future. For the first time, I spoke openly about my childhood in the shelter, about the defenses I'd built around myself, about the loneliness that had driven me to succeed but kept me isolated. There was no shame in the telling, no pity in the listening, just human connection, the kind my parents would have wanted for me. To David and Elizabeth, Michael proposed a toast at one point, who are finally getting the justice they deserve. And to Emma, Clara added, her eyes bright with pride as she raised her glass to me, who found her way home. Home, such a simple word, yet it had eluded me for most of my life. Home wasn't just a place, not the penthouse I'd bought to prove my success, not even the property on Willow Lane with its complex history. Home was belonging. Home was truth. Home was the courage to open oneself to connection, to trust, to love. The music box melody had led me there, had guided me back to myself. As I looked around the table at these people who had become my chosen family, I felt it fully for perhaps the first time. I was home. Not because I had reclaimed my past, but because I had finally embraced my present and opened myself to the future. Spring came to Willow Lane, bringing new growth to the construction site. The community center's framework rose steadily, taking shape day by day. I visited often, sometimes bringing children from the shelter to watch the progress, explaining how this place would soon be there's a safe haven, a launching pad for dreams, a connection point for families. Will you live here? One little girl asked me, her eyes serious beneath a tangle of curls. I smiled, kneeling to her level. No, but I'll visit so often you'll probably get tired of seeing me. She considered this, then shook her head solemnly. I don't think I'd get tired of you. The simple statement touched something deep within me. This was the legacy my parents had begun. Not buildings or businesses, but human connections built on respect and care. Clara's health waxed and waned with the seasons. On good days, she would sit in the garden of my home, telling stories about my parents, filling in the tapestry of my history with vibrant threads. Your mother loved thunderstorms, she told me once as we watched lightning flash across the city skyline. She would stand on the porch and breathe in the scent of rain, saying it made her feel alive. These small details were precious beyond measure, connecting me to the woman who had given me life, who had loved me enough to sing lullabies and hide music boxes. On Clara's harder days, when pain or fatigue overwhelmed her, I would sit beside her bed and read aloud or simply hold her hand in silence. We both understood these moments were limited, that our time together was a gift neither of us had expected to receive. The Wallace Family Foundation expanded its work, funding programs for foster children across the country. I found myself speaking at conferences, advocating for policy changes, using my platform and resources to ensure other children wouldn't face the isolation I had known. Every child deserves to know their story became my mantra, the driving force behind initiatives to preserve family connections, even when circumstances required separation. The business empire I'd built remained successful, but it no longer defined me. Purpose had replaced ambition as my primary motivation. The wealth I'd accumulated became a tool for creating change rather than a shield against vulnerability. I began to understand that true strength lay not in independence, but in interdependence, in the courage to connect, to care, to stand for something larger than oneself. On the anniversary of my parents' deaths, a date I now knew and could properly observe, I visited their graves for the first time. Clara had told me where they were buried, in a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Their shared headstone was simple, etched with their names and the dates that marked their two brief lives. I brought flowers and something else, the childhood drawing of our house, preserved in a weatherproof case. I placed it against the stone, a bridge between past and present. I found my way back, I told them, speaking aloud though no one was there to hear. I know who I am now, who you were, what matters. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of nearby trees, a whisper of acknowledgement or perhaps just nature's constant movement. Either way, I felt peace in that moment, the peace that comes from truth, from completion of a circle too long left open. The music box still played its lullaby each night as I prepared for sleep. But now, instead of representing questions without answers, it symbolized connection, to my mother who had hidden it for safekeeping, to Clara who had preserved it hoping I would someday find it, to the child I had been and the woman I had become. Sometimes I would sing along with the melody, the words rising from memory, or perhaps from something deeper, some cellular recognition passed from mother to daughter. On those nights, I would dream of the house on Willow Lane, not as it had been in reality, but as it appeared in the child's drawing. In these dreams, my parents waited on the porch, smiling, arms outstretched in welcome. I would wake from such dreams not with sadness, but with gratitude for having found my way home at last, for having reclaimed not just justice but identity. The truth, once revealed, had indeed set me free. What a journey we've traveled together through this story of reconnection, justice, and healing. Emma's path from orphan child to self-made millionaire to someone who finally discovered her true identity reminds us of the powerful human need to know where we come from and who we truly are. Perhaps her story has touched something in your own life. Have you ever felt disconnected from your past or your true self? Have you experienced the healing that comes when long-buried truths finally emerge into the light? Maybe, like Emma, you've had to build your own identity without the foundation most take for granted. The music box that guided Emma home is a powerful symbol of how small connections to our past can transform our future. What music boxes exist in your own life? Those tangible or intangible links to who you really are. Are there mysteries in your own story waiting to be solved? Connections waiting to be made? Emma's transformation wasn't just about uncovering truth. It was about using that truth to create something meaningful, to help others who shared her struggles. Her decision to build the community center on Willow Lane shows how pain can be transformed into purpose when we choose healing over bitterness. What would it look like for you to take the most painful parts of your story and transform them into something that helps others? How might your own experiences, even the difficult ones, become a foundation for connection rather than isolation? If Emma's journey has moved you, I encourage you to share this story with others who might need its message of hope and restoration. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of transformation and healing. Your own journey of discovery might just be beginning, and I'm honored to be part of it. Remember, like Emma discovered, home isn't just a place. It's belonging, it's truth, it's the courage to open yourself to connection. No matter where you've been or what you've lost, that kind of home is always possible to find.